Hey, another exciting episode, audience. I want to give you the opportunity to make your voice heard on the podcast. Send in an audio recording, you can do it right on your phone, and share your comments and or questions about Season 2 of Adventures of Superman and or our podcast. Submissions should be under 1 minute in length. Please be sure to include your name and where you're from, and email it to flatsquirrelproductions@gmail.com before Sunday, November 10th, 2024. All of this information is in the show notes as well. I look forward to hearing from you. We reference the television series Smallville a lot around here, and there's one Smallville rewatch podcast that's always at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring tremendous insight, passion, and humor as they discuss each and every episode of the series that ushered in the renaissance of superhero TV. Listen to Always Hold On to Smallville wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows under the Always Hold On To banner, including Arrow, DC's Legends of Tomorrow, Superman and Lois, and Star Wars. Aw Yeah Comics celebrates and promotes everything that is wonderful about comics, toys, artwork, and the joy they bring to people. Visit them in person at one of their 3 locations: Harrison, New York, aka my local comic shop, Skokie, Illinois, or Muncie, Indiana. If you have kids and have been looking for a family-friendly store, look no further. Join Aw Yeah for exciting events, including creator signings, how-tos, and more. Visit awyeahcomics.com and follow Aw Yeah on social media for more. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw Yeah. In the 1950s, George Reeves embodied the Man of Steel in Superman's first television adaptation, from its gritty black and white beginnings to the kid-friendly color years. To this day, an entire generation reveres George as their Superman, while for others, the show remains an overlooked chapter in the character's mythology. On this podcast, we bring everyone together as we break down each episode of Adventures of Superman. Welcome to another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss Season 2, Episode 20, Beware the Wrecker, is the host of the Krypton Report podcast, returning guest Tyler Patrick. Welcome back.
Hey, thank you for having me back. It's good to be back and talking this iteration of Superman.
Yeah, man, and we are really in the final stretch of Season 2 here. Overall thoughts and feelings on this season/era of the overall Reeves series?
Well, like I had told you when we had talked in the first season, I bought them all. I have them all. And I had seen episodes throughout history just here and there, never really having the collection of when. So I wanted to wait and watch it along with the podcast. So I'm not getting too far ahead. So getting into Season 2, I definitely see more of what you talked about the tonal shifts and just certain things. And I don't want to give anything away, but as we talk about it, I'll definitely hit on it. But it has been a little interesting, just even from the title card change at the beginning compared to how it was like the symbol with the words over it. That's been just visually a difference.
Yeah, for sure. No, I'm excited to get into this, and you're going to be back even later in the season for the penultimate episode of Season 2. So I'm excited for this and our next discussion as well. While we're here at the top, what do you want to share with folks about Krypton Report podcast? What do you have going on or coming up that you want people to know about?
Oh, man. Well, good old Krypton Report. We cover all things, DC and Superman related. And I'm thinking like, we were doing this whole reread of the Superman books from the New 52, but we were approaching it in the trades and talking about basically, because a lot of times you heard, the New 52 was written for trades. And for some of the titles, it really wasn't, because we did Superman, we did Action, and then we are doing the Superman Wonder Woman book. And the trade we just read is so confusing because every issue ties into something else. And we've run into that before. So that's been just a kind of an adventure in reading, but we are reviewing right now the final season of Superman and Lois. And we're gearing up for some specials next year for, the year of Superman. So that'll be fun.
Yeah, very cool. I hope everyone will check out Krypton Report on all major podcast platforms and YouTube and social media channels as well. And I'm curious whether our George Reeves' Adventures of Superman audience, how many of them have been following Superman and Lois? I'd be curious to hear. I know you and I are fans, and I look forward to your continuing coverage, and I'll do an episode about it on Digging for Kryptonite when it's all done. But yeah, definitely been a strong, albeit short-lived entry in the Superman canon.
It's sad, but in a lot of ways, that's what TV has become now. These tighter stories in, shorter seasons. And I think there's positives to that, but I think a healthier balance. Like, I still think the first season of The Flash is one of the best superhero seasons of all time. You had these random episodes, bottled episodes, but you still had that one season long arc that worked. And I kind of miss that at times, where you can just like flip to an episode and just enjoy the episode without needing to it be so dense to where you don't feel like you can just watch an episode. You have to watch it all.
I don't disagree. And I see this debate come up on social media from time to time, this idea of a quote unquote filler episode. And folks have, I think, rightly pointed out, like, hey, there's something to be said for the quote unquote filler episode, because sometimes an episode that doesn't tie in so heavily to the season long arc, it can be fun. It can allow an opportunity for character development. There's a lot of value there. So don't be quick to write that off. And I think that's one of those things that has kind of fallen by the wayside with, again, these much shorter seasons and a far more serialized approach. But for the complete opposite of that, we have Adventures of Superman.
Yeah. And then you have like this, where it's like nothing's really connected at all, where you could almost put them in any order you choose. You don't really see an evolution of any way. And then you're just like, okay, all right. I mean, that's the way it was.
Yeah. It's like, a little serialization might have been okay. Or just a character returning. Although, funny enough, we'll put a pin in that, because when you come back for the Whistling Bird later this season, we do have a rare recurring character, Uncle Oscar, the eccentric professor. But again, that's a pretty isolated instance of a recurring character. But in any event, we're here now to talk about Beware the Wrecker, January 30th, 1954, written by Royal K. Cole, directed by George Blair. The writer, this was fascinating to me, because virtually all of our season 2 episodes have been written by David Chandler, Roy Hamilton. Royal K. Cole wrote this episode. This was the only episode that they wrote.
Interesting.
Yeah, I didn't find anything beyond that, but to our audience, I would be curious if anyone has any insight into kind of how this came to be, because the writing credit, again, here was definitely an outlier compared to the rest of the season.
It is interesting when you see that, especially in a show like this, where you've been seeing the same people, that all of a sudden there's like a random writer and you're like, okay.
Yeah. And at first I thought, well, is this a nom de plume of Whitney Ellsworth or someone else? But no, apparently not the case. But in any event, here is my summary of Beware the Wrecker. A narrated opening montage reveals that over the past year, a mysterious caller known as the Wrecker has caused the destruction of a plane, steamship, and train, all in an attempt to extort the city for $100,000. Henderson assembles the 3 heads of Metropolis's transportation systems and convinces them not to pay. At the time of the next threatened attack, Superman intercepts a small remote-controlled airplane containing a warhead. When the Wrecker threatens simultaneous attacks next time, Henderson agrees to pay the ransom. He and the Daily Planet crew stake out the drop-off, but the Wrecker gets away with the package, albeit a decoy, through a hollow, lead-lined tree trunk. Clark takes Lois and Jim to the carnival on a hunch, where they realize that the strange noises they heard during the Wrecker's calls were actually the thumping of a mallet and the clanging of the bell in the strongman game. Lois and Jim find a shack next to the carnival and a man named Hatch carrying the package, and they manage to tie him up. But by the time they leave to get Clark and return, Hatch has been killed. Finally, Henderson brings the 3 transportation heads to Perry's office as instructed by Superman, who reveals himself and claims that one of the 3 is the Wrecker. When a miniature airplane flies into the office, Superman notices that Mr. Crane, head of the steamship line, ducks in fear. He was the Wrecker all along and did it for the insurance money. Perry wonders where Clark is, and Superman says he's sure Clark is around somewhere. Overall thoughts and impressions of this one?
Man, I will say that I liked it because it was a little different, a little mysterious. And then I thought to myself, and I forgot to look it up, when Toyman came into the comics, because it reminded me of Toyman. It reminded me also of the episode, it's Beware the Gray Ghost episode of Batman the Animated Series with the guy who uses the toy to carry the bombs and everything. Um, I do have a couple of comments. I'll wait till we talk a little bit more about it, but um, I just my first thought was who is the voiceover? I was like, who is this?
Yeah.
It didn't sound like Perry, and it wasn't Clark. I was like, who's the voiceover?
No, definitely not one of our regular characters. Going back to your Toyman question, Toyman debuted in 1943, so well established by this point. I mean, this could have been a Toyman episode, but obviously not the direction they went.
Yeah,
so
makes you kind of wonder.
Yeah, a bunch of things I do want to talk about, but let me just also do my guest star breakdown. So we have William Forrest as Mr. Crane, the steamship official, Tom Powers as Mr. Kilgore, the railroad official, had a long Broadway career, Denver Pyle as Emil Hatch, who was Uncle Jesse Duke on the Dukes of Hazzard, which I never watched. Did you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did. My brother and my brother did more than I did, but like he bought the first season because he got into watching it. And of course, that was neat to see, because we had the Smallville episode crossover. So it was like, okay, I got to, watching some Dukes of Hazzard to really appreciate that episode of Smallville.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, that's really the only connection I have to Dukes of Hazzard was, I mean, Smallville generally, but specifically that episode where Tom Wopat guest starred and reunited with Schneider. Rennie McAvoy as the carnival barker, and most notably, and how perfect that you were here for this, Pierre Watkin as Mr. Morgan, the airline official. He was, of course, Perry White in the Kirk Allen Superman movie serials. And you joined me on Digging for Kryptonite a while back, and you and I discussed those serials. So this is the episode where Perry White from the serials is on the show and actually shares a scene with John Hamilton as Perry.
So would you consider this as the first kind of legacy casting?
Legacy casting.
Like usually, like, because it's tricky with Superman to say legacy casting in the sense because a lot of times legacy casting is because it'll be like we've seen where a previous Lois Lane will play the new Lois Lane's mom. And that's kind of legacy, in a sense. But yeah, this is still a previous Superman casting and reappearing in a new project.
Did you feel that this episode used him to the effect that they could have?
Oh, he should have been Mr. Crane. It would have been more interesting.
I mean, not for anything. Like, look, again, it's easy for us to say this. Look, you and I, the fact that we even have this conception of legacy casting, right? We have a whole different view that at the time, I don't think really would have been much in the conversation. But I don't know. They still know they're bringing in an actor who played a character who now appears on this show, played by someone else. I'm not saying we need to have like a multiversal bit of business or anything along those lines, but just a more prominent role. I mean, I just feel like they could have gotten some more mileage out of having two Perry Whites.
I'm trying to think, did he have a scene at all with Noel Neal?
I think they were in scenes together, but I don't know that they had any. Basically, I think the two scenes, one at the beginning and one at the end in Perry's office.
Okay. I was trying to remember if she was there at the beginning, but I'm pretty sure she was there at the end, but I don't remember.
Well, so interestingly, this is one of the things I wanted to bring up. I feel like there were some odd blocking and odd angles in this episode.
Yes.
Yeah. You're nodding along. Okay, good. What was, before I go further, you take it.
Well, I mean, there's just sometimes you just look at stuff like, what? I mean, nothing's jumping out, but I kind of, knowing the way they shot this series, where they would shoot multiple episodes, sometimes just on that same set, so that they weren't, wasting the set and whatever. It makes me sometimes wonder, like, if they messed up a shot or they got the wrong coverage, and then they were trying to just edit in from what would be for another episode, but they used it for this one because, so I always look at like little things. I'm also really, when I watch things, I pay attention to the edits and people's like hands and heads, because then a lot of times if I'm talking to you, I'm moving my head as I talk. But then when they do the edit for the reversal, my head is still,
Yeah.
and it just, but yeah, there were some things that just kind of felt a little jarring.
So here's, I guess, the biggest and best example or worst example I can cite, which is that first scene after the opening narration when they're all convened in Perry's office. You don't even know that anyone else is there, right? Because we open just on Henderson and the three transportation heads. And then eventually we cut to Lois and Clark sitting on a couch. And then we also cut to Perry. And I can't remember if Jim is there or not. He might not be at this point, but don't hold me to that.
I don't think so, because I have in my notes, it says Perry is very hard and mean to Jimmy. Why?
Yes.
Because I think he yells for him. Like,
yes. Well, that's coming up, and I want to talk about that too. But in this scene, eventually one of the transportation heads does go over to Perry's desk to take the call from the wrecker. So they do eventually share the frame together. But Lois and Clark, again, unless I'm totally blanking, in that entire scene, every time we cut to them, it's just the two of them, right, in that static shot. So to your point about the way they shot this, I don't know that they were even in the same, if they shot this at the same time. I think they might have just shot in their coverage at another point. But it kind of like sucks the life out of this scene because you don't have that interaction, and it just feels like everybody's very separated.
Yeah, it does. It reminds me in some ways of how they started shooting things after COVID.
Yeah.
When they first started shooting things where they like, you could kind of feel like, oh, they're not together, or you're shooting in pairs or something. It was a little jarring just because it doesn't feel like they're there at all.
Yeah. I mean, that was something that stood out to me. Again, just some odd cuts, some odd staging of some of this. Again, I was happy to see Pierre Watkin. I wish that he had been used more prominently. Even if he had just been the bad guy in the end, that would have been enough, I think, where it's like, oh, okay, that's cool. You bring in the old Perry White and he's the bad guy. That would have been a little something. What did you think about the fact that we opened with that montage and narration? Because it is unusual for the show. It's not the first time, and hell, the first time you were on the show, we talked about the Haunted Lighthouse, and that had that whole extended narration. So it is a device that they occasionally employ, but it's rare.
I put there's 3 minutes into the episode before we have dialogue. So it's just 3 minutes, with the montage. I felt that it was odd just because it made me question, like, is there something before this, or is this just how it is? Because they're establishing that this has been going on. And then it's just like, it's not a cold opening, but it's like, it's just weird because, a lot of times episodes start where something happens that kickstarts the episode. This is like montage of everything that's been going on. And you know what it reminds me of, and this is kind of retroactive, of how some of the episodes of Batman 66 would start with like the narrator and then show you clips of what had happened. And then you just start the episode.
Right.
It reminds me of that, even though this technically is before that. It feels like you missed something, like you're coming in late.
Interesting. I don't disagree. But I think what happened with this I think this episode was short. I think this came in short, and or they had an alternate opening that they couldn't film or didn't use for some reason. I mean, I doubt they would have filmed it and not used it, but maybe they didn't film it. I all that to say, I would just be surprised if this were the original intended opening, but maybe it was. But to me, it feels like this episode came in short. And the other big reason why I say that is the scene you were alluding to between Perry and Jimmy. That scene lifts right out of the episode where Jimmy comes into Perry's office and just has this whole theory about like, oh, the wrecker could be anyone. And Perry's biting his head off. And it's just this back and forth that really adds nothing. And so I feel like that was a later addition to kind of pad out the runtime. Again, as always, I could be wrong, but that's the way it played to me.
I mean, it does feel like that. The beginning feels like we have to elongate something, use some stock shots of things that we have that we can kind of cut in with the narration and everything just helps build. Because maybe something, I mean, it is possible. I mean, we know how the production schedule was done. Maybe something was damaged or lost, or like you said, ran out of time even filming it. What needed, because they were trying to shoot on the cheap too.
Yeah, again, it just kind of had that feel to me. Also, though, I guess to the show's credit, though, with the premise of this, a number of episodes ago, we looked at the machine that could plot crimes, and we talked about how it was like this device that Uncle Oscar had created. It was almost like an early version of AI. It's this machine that could think and reason. Similarly here, this is essentially a form of terrorism that the Wrecker is engaging in. And that's something that, sadly, we're far more used to those kinds of stories and obviously drawn from real life and whatnot in more recent years. But I feel like this was kind of ahead of its time in a weird, dark way as well.
You can see that.
So interesting premise. Is there anything else that stands out to you just kind of about the early part of the episode?
Well, I mean, when they do the conversation about, I got here in my notes about they're going to leave the money. They're going to try to pay the Wrecker and the stump. They put them in a stump and they're watching it, and the stump is hollow and made of lead. And the way it's like it goes down to the water main shaft or whatever it could be. It could be anywhere in the city. So I was like, that's interesting. I find, okay, the one thing I will say that I put in my notes here, and this is kind of over the whole episode, is I find Clark reminds me of a parent trying to lead their child to the answer. Like, Clark just comes off very not condescending, but a little bit with the way he talks to Jimmy and Lois, very much like this big dad who, like, I already know the answer and what's going on, but I'm going to try to make sure that you figure it out. Like, I don't know. It was almost kind of off-putting.
Did you feel that way specifically with the carnival stuff or
yes.
Yeah.
I mean, the carnival's where I think is where I put it in my notes, but I was kind of feeling it throughout the episode.
Well, okay. So I don't disagree with you because he says to Lois and Jim something like, we need a break, right? And that's why he takes them to the carnival. But I think it's pretty clear he has this hunch, right? Because when the Wrecker calls, there are these weird clangs and bells that everyone hears in the background, right? So clearly he has this hunch that these noises are coming from a carnival, and that's why he brings them there. But it's like, why would you not just tell them? Right?
Mm-hmm. So I just had to double check. He got his super hearing in 1940.
And we've seen him use it on the show before.
Yeah, I thought so. And I just wanted to double check because there's certain parts I'm like, I don't know. Superman is very absent from this episode. And even Clark feels remotely absent from this episode. As, I mean, it's Jimmy and Lois that find Hatch. And when they find Mr. Hatch sitting there, I had to stop and think wait, am I supposed to know who this is? Did I miss something, And because I was expecting to come in, the Wrecker's sitting there, and it's going to be I was like, who is this guy? And they have all of a sudden they have a gun on him, and then Lois has the gun on him and stuff, and Clark's just playing games at the carnival. I do think it's interesting they're at the carnival walking around, and there's just a lone house, and they're all kind of oh, the house next to the carnival. Not that it's that far, what I'm saying, it's right there at the end of the carnival, a house.
Yeah, geography is a little suspect here, but also this was, I think, one of the big picture things when I was really mapping out this episode after watching it and thinking about how we were going to talk about it. I do feel like there was some connective tissue missing here to kind of take us from that scene in the park where the package goes missing to the carnival. Like I think we needed to see Clark put these pieces together somehow. Mm-hmm. Even if it were, you zoom in on his ear and he's clearly using his super hearing when they're on the phone or something like that. I don't know, but I feel like the carnival bit really just came out of nowhere, no?
It did, because once again, like much like with the hatch, I'm looking at my notes and I'm watching this and I'm watching it, like I'm not distracted. And all of a sudden I'm like, why are they at a carnival all of a sudden? Like, what did I miss?
Yeah. Well, I want to circle back to the carnival, but I do want to jump back first because there's the whole scene at the pier where Henderson has increased the police force, right? Henderson's increased the police force at the pier after convincing, the head of the steamship company not to pay the ransom. And Lois has talked about trying to get Superman to come and help as well. And I like Henderson, the character, but I just don't feel like he's particularly good at his job. And his overconfidence in this scene really jumped out at me, where he's basically like, we don't need Superman. And when nothing blows up at the exact second that it was threatened, he's so sure that the increased police force down at the pier was enough to keep the wrecker at bay. And he's just so pleased with himself. But then, of course, we see this drone flying through the sky and Clark has to burst into action. But I don't know, man. Again, I like Henderson, but I just don't think he's that good of a policeman.
I mean, it's that conundrum. They did do some different angles of him flying and different styles of, instead of just that stock kind of one shot from season 1. Like they did some from the front with some different rear projection and stuff. So it definitely made the flying a little bit more exciting here.
What did you think about that scene where he intercepts the drone, so to speak? Because I feel like, and I normally do not beat up on the show for its effects. I appreciate what they were able to achieve. Felt like this looked a bit rough, especially the drone itself. Yeah. And you could see like whatever sort of matting process that you could see the outline behind it.
Mm-hmm. I know it's kind of funny. I mean, I appreciate it, but it's like you said before, these things where people weren't thinking then like, oh, they're going to watch them in HD on 70, 80-inch screens where we can pause and pick apart a frame. So I just found it's got a charm to it, like you can see little things in the back. Like, oh, I can see how there's a string holding this up or whatever. But
yeah, I look, to whatever extent they were able to realize that on screen, it was at least something different. I mean, there have been so few instances, we're at this point now, we're accustomed to the standard flying shots. And obviously in season 2, they mixed it up and we get different angles. There's the one that we see in a lot of the nighttime set episodes of Superman flying towards the camera with the city, the skyline behind him. And especially for the time, like really cool. But still, in terms of him kind of doing anything in the air, those instances are few and far between. Yeah, I think about stuff like Superman on Earth, the origin episode where he catches the guy, who's falling, or the human bomb episode, there's a catch as well. It's so rare, and it's, I think, really tough for them to do on screen. But the fact that they attempted it with this drone here, I thought, left a little to be desired, but I admired the effort.
You gotta give him props for it.
Yeah.
You have to, like,
I don't mean to, I guess there wasn't a ton that I really loved about this episode. Nevertheless, I do hate to kind of like go through my list of grievances with it. I don't want it to have that air about it, but we mentioned this scene at the park, the stakeout, where you have the Daily Planet crew and Henderson, I think another police officer, and they're watching this stump where the package has been placed on top. They're not far at all from this stump, not to mention the fact that you have someone with super sight, but we'll put that aside. No one sees this package disappear. They're like right in front of it.
Well, Clark shows up a beat later. Like they're already there. Then they hear something and they forget, and it's Clark. And it's right after Clark shows up that it it disappears. And it's kind of like, and I put my note, he's kind of acting like he knew how this was all along. And that goes back to my kind of like just Clark in this episode. But yeah, no one, they're like, I mean, obviously the wrecker could have just walked up and taken it and walked off. Like he couldn't, because they're all right, like you said, right there. You would see them in the bush, like, I can see you coming to take the package.
Well, so the idea is, right, like he reached up from underneath, right, and pulled it down into this hollowed out stump, right? So fair enough. It's not like, I mean, I don't think the idea was like someone literally walked by. I think it was like the hand came up from below, and but still, it's like they were right there. And there were so many of them.
Well, they all turned to see Clark. And then when they turned to see Clark, they turned back and it was gone.
I guess.
My favorite was when they were doing the hammer, like the strength, and Clark just like breaks it and is like, oh, don't know my own strength.
Which that was another thing that really stood out to me. And it's funny because we just did the episode Perry White's Scoop. And in that one, Perry and Clark go to the gym as part of their investigation. And Clark hits the heavy bag and punches a hole in it. And so it was just another kind of instance of that, of him, you know, just putting those powers on full display, which, I mean, I don't know. I just kind of like thinking about the psychology of him, this version of the character. Like, what do you think that was?
I know. Like, is he showing off? Is it peacocking kind of thing? Like, look at me. Like, this Clark's very strong, capable person. He's always kind of putting himself out there. I don't know. It feels like almost like a power play of dominance. Like he put the Carney in his place. Like, yeah, don't bother us.
Yeah, I mean, because I certainly don't take it. I don't take him at his word that he was like, oh, I didn't realize my own strength. Like, clearly he knows what he's capable of. I think that was very much a conscious choice to use his power in that moment. Again, a pretty far cry from what we typically see from the character in other interpretations generally. And I feel like when we have had exceptions to that, like using his strength to crush someone else's hand in a handshake, if they're a bully, for example, right? We see little instances of that, but usually it's provoked in some way. Here, I don't know. I mean, I guess Lois did make that remark about if he's Superman, then I'm the Queen of May, or something like that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess that's the thing, right? That's how it transpires, right? Where initially the idea is Jim's going to do it. And he's like, no, but Mr. Kent. And then doesn't the carnival barker say like, oh, you're not the Superman type, right? Or something like that. So, I mean, provoked, I guess, but I guess it doesn't take much to set this Clark off where he's like, I'll show you.
I'm surprised he's not punching him in the face, but.
Well, it's season 2. Season 1.
I know.
That guy would have been on the ground. Yeah. No, it's fine. Again, and this isn't even a criticism. It's just like I'm genuinely kind of curious by the psychology of this Clark and kind of what the motivation was in that moment. But also going back to Lois's line, I mean, I feel like Lois is all over the place. Some episodes she's convinced Clark is Superman, is trying to prove it. Other episodes, it's like she can't even entertain that notion. It really depends on the week.
It makes me wonder, with like we said, with the production schedule, like. It's very possible they're just airing these in a random order, or when they're done. Like this could have been maybe in the production schedule, like this was earlier in the season, and then that was aired later. We know examples of that happening in television where, you have an episode that's filmed early but then not aired till much later. Not so much anymore, but.
Yeah, I mean, I know they were still employing that kind of batch filming model where they would have like a handful of episodes in a block. And so they would film all the Perry scenes for those 4 or 5 episodes in a concentrated period of time and so on. But I don't, and we could double check this, we have the resources, but I don't believe that they aired as like wildly out of order as the first season. So I think generally that was not as much the case in season 2 and beyond. Again, I could be mistaken, but I mean, your point still stands. It's just kind of interesting to me how this fluctuates across these episodes. I do have to say though, I was shocked at Clark's restraint when Lois and Jim come up to him at the carnival and they're like, we found the guy. We've got him tied up. And Clark's like, you left him alone? He does express some disbelief, but he was still far calmer than I would have expected from this Clark at the notion that they left the guy alone, right? I feel like he was relatively restrained.
I'm just sitting here watching this Clark's not even gonna they left him alone, use his hearing to listen in. Like, is he still there? What's going on? Like, I don't know. That's just,
this comes up a lot, and I know I've brought this up, and it's not limited to this version of the character. I do think about this with Superman generally, and kind of how I would behave if I had these enhanced senses, and especially if I were on an investigation. Right? I don't mean everyday life. You want to respect people's privacy, but whether as Clark or Superman, when you're investigating, you're looking for someone or something. I feel like it would be second nature to scan with my X-ray vision, or just listen in really closely, like just at the outset, just as a preliminary built-in automatic part of the investigation. But the thing that I have to accept, and I think this is a function of we can't have these stories be solved too easily, but also this version in particular, this version of Clark, it's like he's only Superman when he absolutely needs to be. And similarly, I feel like he only uses his powers when he really needs to. I mean, most of what he does is just as Clark. So I get what you're saying, but I think for this version, it doesn't take me out of it so much, right? Like that he didn't use his super hearing. I kind of get it with this iteration.
I mean, it makes sense. It's just one of those things, like when you're watching and you know so much about the character. Even that's why sometimes I check when certain powers were created, just to be like, am I jumping the gun on something? Because I'm like, why don't he just do this?
No, I know. I mean, at this point, obviously,
also we've seen him do stuff very similar before.
Yeah,
in past episodes. So
no, I mean, at this point, we see flight and strength all the time. We did see super speed at least once in that episode where he was typing up his story at super speed. But again, I feel like there are so many instances where he should be using that, but we don't see it. We've seen him use heat vision by way of his X-ray vision to start a fire. We've seen him use X-ray vision. We've seen him use super hearing. So, and then as the seasons progress, we'll see him use powers that he doesn't have anywhere else, like splitting himself in two and, things like that.
Yeah, those are the best,
Yeah.
The random, where did they come from? Then you have to spend the next 50 years on the internet debating it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would say this Superman, his power level is relatively modest, but in terms of that power set, I think he has what we typically associate with the character. They're just not always in use. When we get to the climax of this episode, again, this whole scene where Henderson brings in the three transportation heads and it's all at Superman's behest, and he steps out from behind the curtain in Perry's office or the blinds.
That was ridiculous. I'm watching this scene and they're like, I thought Superman would be here. Then he just steps. I'm like, really? That's your grand entrance? I was here all along. It just.
Yeah. I don't know why do you think he felt he needed to make a big reveal of himself there?
I don't know. So that when it actually happens, I feel like it would have been a better, if I was Superman, with what he was playing after the person moved, then showed up.
Yes. Well, because that's the thing. Him revealing himself, it's supposed to be this aha moment, but from the jump, Henderson's like, oh, Superman asked us to come here, so I don't know why. It had to be, I guess for the kids, they wanted them. It's Superman. But for the story, I don't know that it really made sense.
Yeah, because to me, because if they're like, oh, what's that going to happen? Superman's here. He's going to stop it. So we don't have to worry. But if he's not there and someone goes to, it would be interesting if Mr. Crane ducks, or because I found the whole reveal kind of off at the same time. But I get what they were going with, because if Mr. Crane's the wrecker, he would have called the shot to have the thing show up to blow up the office. right? So for it to just, and knowing that he killed Hatch, like, what's his motive and thought for ducking? Like, the other people would have been the ones to move and duck, and he would have been the one not to. And that's how I would have known that he was the wrecker.
Well, I agree, because they all know the wrecker's MO. They know he uses these miniature airplanes with warheads. So I agree. It would have been the better tell, or the more accurate tell would have been not moving at all.
So like when he his rationale at the end, I was kind of like, I'm confused, but I get what you're doing, and that's the end of the episode.
It is what it is. I mean, I feel like the setup to this one was decent, where these transportation systems are under attack. I mean, the episode doesn't dwell on this, but I mean, a plane, a train, and a ship are blown up. I mean, that's pretty catastrophic damage and loss of life.
On it? Yeah, I'll say, were there people on this? Like, they don't talk about like, oh, we just lost merchandise or we lost this.
Yeah, I mean,
lost people.
Yeah, I mean, even if these were not passenger vehicles, nevertheless, they're still piloted and you know and whatnot by individuals. So there's some loss of life and certainly heavy property damage. So you know, the stakes are high. I mean, maybe they didn't want to get into that too much for the kids, but I mean, I don't know. The stakes were relatively high in this one, but oh, what a dud of a payoff! I did it for the insurance money. I'm like, all right, fine, I guess.
So you got insurance money and you got the bribe money. So, and you're taking out your competition? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, you did it so your friends would get insurance money too? Like,
yeah, I mean, now I'm really thinking about it, because it's like, why?
You had to attack others just to make it look like it wasn't you attacking yourself.
Right. But why? Why that part? I mean, like,
so that we don't automatically assume it's you and you're doing it for the insurance money. Like, you want the double payout. You get to hold the city ransom. And it's not like you're taking out the air industry and, you know, the train, boosting your shipping industry or whatever. Like, oh, well, you know, there's been 2 trains attacked and 2 planes, but only 1 ship. Ship is safer to go, you know, so that you're increasing your business, holding the city for ransom, and getting insurance money. So you're getting, you know, 3 times the paying.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I think that I guess that answers the why, the double payout. I guess I was thinking of it more as like, why would you need to threaten the others to make it believable that your ship was just destroyed? But fair enough. Not only, I guess, does it further that case, but it also, you know, you get potentially this double payout.
I mean, I would have like blown up my ship and destroyed like the plane, so we were framing the train guy. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, so they're like, well, yours didn't get attacked, and you're starting to make more money off being the only one operating. It must be you as the wrecker, you know, as a frame job. But they didn't put that much thought in it.
It's weird too, because that nothing scene between Perry and Jim early on, when Jim was like, it could be anybody, but he does specifically say like it could be one of those 3 guys, or even you, Perry, Mr. White. I don't know. I mean, they're planting that seed from early on. I mean, I don't know what a better payoff would have been. Maybe if all 3 of them had been working together. I mean, would that have been any better? I mean, I don't know. I don't think this was
better with that line if Mr. Crane was played by the other Perry White. So it could be even you, Mr. White.
Look, for anyone who loves this episode, I wish I could see what you see. I don't think this one was particularly good. I did not like this so much.
I would be very bummed if this was like the first episode of The Adventures of Superman that I watched, because I'd be like, where's Superman? Why is Clark not that cool? Why is he kind of a jerk? Why is Mr. White so mean to Jimmy? Who are these people? Like, it just feels like everything that you come to the show for was almost absent in this episode.
Yeah. The last thing that I want to share is I talked about that final exchange where Superman is standing in Perry's office and Perry's like, where's Kent? Like I told, should know better than to be away for too long. And Superman's like, oh, I'm sure Clark is around somewhere. In the book Flights of Fantasy, there is the original scripted ending to this, which I wanted to share, where in the original script, what Superman said was, "Take it easy, Mr. White. For a moment, I thought you were shouting at me," which actually I think it would have been better than, I'm sure Clark is around here somewhere.
Yeah, it would have been interesting because then he could definitely do the wink at the screen, you know, with that charm that seemed to be kind of absent in this episode.
Yeah, but anyway, I just wanted to kind of share that alternate. Before we give our Fedora rating, anything else about this episode we didn't talk about that you want to?
No, I think we got it. I'm just looking over my notes real quick in my handy dandy Superman notebook.
Very nice.
I put it. Look, it felt like a Scooby-Doo style ending at the end of it. I watch a lot of Scooby-Doo with my daughter.
Fair enough. All right, so out of 5 fedoras, how many would you give this one?
Man, I'm gonna go with 1.
1 fedora.
Just because I feel like every character the only character that feels like they're who they're supposed to be is Jimmy. Everybody else fell off. Lois didn't really have anything to do. It was barely in the episode. Clark and Superman were barely in the episode. It just didn't. It almost felt like an episode you built out of extra footage that you shot. And you're trying to create a narrative.
I hear you. So you get 2 fedoras. No, 1 fedora, you said, right?
Yeah.
1 fedora.
Because I wouldn't go back and rewatch this one unless I was just watching it straight, where it was on in the background.
I know. I was going to say 2. But I don't know that it really was 2. I'm going to go 1. I'm going to split the difference. I'm going to say 1.5. I'm going to go 1.5 for Beware the Wrecker. Folks, if you love Beware the Wrecker, reach out. Tell me why. I'm always open to, I was going to say I'm always open to watching it again. I don't know how keen I'd be to kind of pop this one in again, but I would be happy to at least kind of reconsider and think about it from another perspective if anyone can really make a great case for this episode. All right, my friend, I thank you very much. I look forward to doing this with you again a little bit later in the season for The Whistling Bird. Audience, I always appreciate you tuning in. Make sure you come back next week. And until then, as always, remember, only Superman can do super things. Fat Moose Comics is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Established in 1982 and under new ownership since 2020, Moose sells a wide selection of comics from every publisher and time period, along with action figures, graphic novels, posters, statues, and more. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you're in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. Filmmakers and movie fans alike should be sure to attend these film festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, Point Lookout on Long Island, and Round Reel in Bloomfield, New Jersey. Take it from an alum of 2 of them. Submission information for filmmakers, as well as details about the festivals, can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news about events, discounts, tickets, and more. Also, listen to the Hang On to Your Shorts and Cullen on Film podcasts available via a shared universe network. Be sure to check out our sister podcast series, Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey, a weekly exploration of Superman's vast 85-year mythology, available wherever you get podcasts. Please join us on social media, become a patron, and subscribe, rate, and review today. Links are in the show notes. Thank you all.